The garage door was still broken when I pulled into the driveway at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning. I remember the time exactly because I looked at my watch when the cab stopped, not because I expected anything to be wrong, but because I was calculating how many hours I'd lost rescheduling the Denver flight. I wasn't supposed to be home until Thursday. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a plumbing supply business from a single truck and a phone book, and I loved my wife, Dorothy, more than any asset on any balance sheet I ever signed. She had been diagnosed with Parkinson's 4 years ago, early stage at first, manageable, then progressively less so. By last spring, she needed help with meals, with bathing, with her medications. She never complained. That was Dorothy. She would smile at me from the recliner and say, "I'm fine, Howard. Stop hovering." I hovered anyway. When my son, Marcus, and his wife, Renee, offered to move into the in-law suite attached to our house, I thought it was the answer to a prayer I hadn't finished saying yet. Marcus was 41. Between jobs, he'd been between jobs before, but this time he said he was serious about getting his real estate license. Renee worked as a pharmacist at a CVS 20 minutes away. She knew medications. She knew dosages. She understood what Dorothy needed better than anyone I could hire off the internet. I told myself that was the reason I said yes. I offered them the suite, rent-free, in exchange for helping with Dorothy's care. No contract. No paperwork. I was his father. You don't write contracts with your own son. That was my first mistake. The arrangement seemed to work for the first few months. I would leave for the office, come home to find Dorothy comfortable. Dinner sometimes already started. Renee refilled Dorothy's prescriptions every 30 days like clockwork. Marcus was studying for his license exam, he said. Though I never saw the books. I didn't push. I was grateful. I was, God help me, relieved. The business trip to Denver was supposed to last 4 days. A supplier conference, 3 meetings, 1 dinner I didn't want to attend. I kissed Dorothy on the forehead Monday morning, told her I'd call every night, and dragged my carry-on to the waiting car. I called Monday night. Renee answered Dorothy's phone and told us Savannah, 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 Savannah. Renee answered again, resting. Fine. Don't worry, Howard. When the supplier conference ended early, a scheduling collapse, the keynote speaker had a family emergency, and half the sessions folded. I could have stayed an extra day and seen a friend. Instead, something I cannot explain to this day pulled me toward the airport. I stood in the terminal at 7 a.m. Wednesday, changed my flight, and was home before noon. The front door was unlocked. I rolled my suitcase into the entryway and listened. The television in the back room was on a game show, the volume too loud, the way Dorothy kept it when no one was sitting with her. That detail landed in my chest like a stone. I walked down the hall. She was in the recliner in her robe. The curtains were drawn. The room smelled stale, like recycled air and something I didn't want to identify. Her lips were dry. I saw it from the doorway, cracked at the corners. The water glass on the side table was empty. The pitcher I kept filled on the kitchen cart was not in the room at all. Dorothy. She looked up at me and the expression on her face broke something inside me that I have not been able to fully repair since. It was not surprise. It was relief. So desperate it looked like pain. Howard, she said, you came home. Of course I came home. I crossed the room and took her hands. They were cold. How long has this glass been empty? She looked at the glass. She looked back at me. I asked. She said quietly. I asked a few times. I went to the kitchen. There was a pizza box on the counter from the night before, 2 empty beer bottles on the island, a half-eaten bag of chips. No sign that anyone had prepared anything resembling a meal for Dorothy. Her medication organizer, the blue weekly pill case I refilled myself every Sunday, sat on the counter. I opened it to Wednesday. The compartment was full. She hadn't taken her morning medication. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment, and I made a decision. I did not call Marcus. I did not walk down to the in-law suite and knock on the door. I went back to Dorothy, got her water, got her medication, sat with her while she drank, and I asked her calmly and carefully to tell me about the last 2 days. She told me. Monday. Renee had brought her breakfast. After that, nothing until dinner, a bowl of soup left on the tray table. No conversation. Tuesday, Marcus had looked in once in the morning. She had asked for water twice. He'd said in a minute and not come back. She had tried to get up herself to reach the kitchen, and had been frightened by how unsteady she felt. So she'd sat back down and waited. She had been waiting since Tuesday morning. I listened to all of it. I held her hand. I did not let my face show what was happening behind my eyes. "You're okay now," I told her. "I'm home." I waited until Dorothy was settled, medicated, and had eaten a proper meal that I cooked myself before I went to find my son. He was in the in-law suite. On the couch, laptop open to something that was not a real estate exam study guide. He looked up when I walked in, and the flash of something not guilt exactly, more like inconvenience, crossed his face before he arranged it into something that resembled welcome. "Dad, you're back early." "I am," I said. "How was Denver?" "Conference ended early." I looked around the suite. It was not messy exactly, but it was comfortable in a way that suggested no urgency had visited it recently. "Where's Renee?" "Work." Her afternoon shift started at 2. I looked at him for a moment. He was my son. I had coached his Little League team. I had sat outside emergency rooms with him twice, once for a broken wrist, once for stitches above his eye from a bicycle fall. I had driven 14 hours round trip to help him move out of an apartment when his first marriage fell apart. I knew the shape of his face better than I knew my own. I said, "Your mother hasn't had water since yesterday morning." Something moved across his face. "She didn't tell me." "She asked you." "Twice." He opened his mouth. I held up one hand and he closed it. "I'm not doing this today," I said. "We'll talk later." I walked out. That night, I lay awake next to Dorothy and made a list in my head. Not a list of grievances, a list of questions. How long had this been happening? Was Monday and Tuesday an exception or a pattern? What exactly was Renee's role in Dorothy's care? And was that role actually being performed? I called Dorothy's primary care physician, Dr. Paulson, the next morning. I explained that I had come home early and described what I had found. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Howard, I want you to bring Dorothy in." "When?" "Today." This afternoon, I brought her in. What Dr. Paulson found during that appointment, the weight loss, the dehydration markers in her blood work, the documented decline in her motor function that exceeded what her condition alone should have produced in 4 months, he described to me with a careful, measured tone that I recognized as the voice doctors use when they are choosing every word deliberately. "How long do you think this has been going on?" I asked. "Based on what I'm seeing," he said. "I don't think this is the result of 2 days." I drove home without Dorothy. She stayed for a hydration 4, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 15 minutes. Then I went inside and I started paying attention. I am a businessman. I have audited my own company 3 times in 31 years. I know how to look at records and find the gap between what should be there and what actually is. I applied that same instinct to my own household. I pulled 3 months of bank statements, the joint account I had given Marcus access to for household expenses. The grocery line items were normal. The pharmacy line items were normal. But there was a recurring transfer, $400 every 10 days, to an account I didn't recognize. I wrote down the account number. I went through Dorothy's medication organizer. I had been refilling it myself every Sunday, but I had been traveling more than usual lately, 4 trips in 3 months. On the Sundays I'd been away, I'd asked Renee to refill it. I looked at the medication log Dr. Paulson had given me, the one that tracked dosage and timing, and I started comparing. The numbers didn't match. Dorothy's tremor medication, a specific dosage I knew by heart, appeared to have been adjusted on the weeks Renee refilled the organizer. Not drastically, subtly. The kind of subtle that a pharmacist would know how to manage, and a husband who trusted his son's wife would not notice. I am not a doctor. I want to be clear about that. I am not qualified to interpret what I found, but I knew enough to be frightened, and I knew enough to do what I did next. I called a lawyer, not a family lawyer, a civil litigation attorney named Patricia Chen, who had handled a contract dispute for my business 6 years earlier and who I trusted completely. I described what I had found, the financial transfers, the medication discrepancies, the condition I'd found Dorothy in, and I asked her what my options were. She was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Howard, you need to talk to Adult Protective Services today, and you need to stop touching anything in that house. They're living here," I said. "I know. That's why you need to act carefully, and you need to act fast." I spent the next 3 weeks acting carefully and acting fast. I did not confront Marcus or Renee. I did not change my behavior at home by a single visible degree. I had dinner with them twice that week. I asked Marcus how the exam prep was going. I asked Renee about her shift. I watched them watch me, and I saw nothing that told me they suspected anything. Because they believed. The way people who have been getting away with something always eventually believe that they were smarter than the person they were taking advantage of. Meanwhile, I had a private investigator reviewing the financial transfers. Patricia was working with APS on the documentation. Dr. Paulson had filed an independent medical report, and I had quietly, with Dorothy's full knowledge and consent, she was angry in a way I had never seen in 38 years of marriage, a cold, quiet anger. I loved her, for I had quietly moved her to a proper care facility for a short respite stay, while I recovered from the stress of the trip. Marcus said he thought that was probably a good idea. The transfer amount, Patricia's investigator found, totaled just over $14,000 over the preceding 5 months, moved in small increments to an account in Renee's name at a bank 2 towns over. The medication adjustment, reviewed by a pharmacist Patricia, retained independently, was consistent with reducing the efficacy of Dorothy's tremor medication without eliminating it entirely enough to accelerate her functional decline, not enough to raise immediate alarm. A registered pharmacist. My son's wife. The person I had trusted with the most important thing in my life because I had told myself that professional credentials were the same as trustworthy character. I have thought about that assumption many times since. On the Thursday of the 4th week, Marcus and Renee came home from wherever they had been to find 3 cars in the driveway that did not belong to me. Patricia was there. An APS investigator was there. And a detective from the county sheriff's office was there, because what Renee had done with those medications crossed a line that APS does not handle alone. I was standing in the kitchen when they walked in. Marcus looked at the cars, looked at the people, looked at me. The inconvenience expression was gone. What replaced it was something I had never seen on my son's face before, and hope never to see again. "Dad, don't," I said. Not loudly. "Just don't, Marcus." Renee understood faster than he did. She was already reaching for her purse when the detective said her name. It took approximately 4 minutes. That is not a dramatic estimate. I watched the clock on the microwave. 4 minutes from the moment they walked in the door to the moment the handcuffs were on. Renee said nothing the entire time. Marcus said my name twice, in a voice I recognized from when he was 7 years old and had done something he couldn't talk his way out of. It did not move me the way it would have moved me once. That is the part I am least proud of. Not that I wasn't moved. I understand why I wasn't. The part I am least proud of is that I had expected to feel something more complicated. And I didn't. I felt tired. I felt the particular exhaustion of a person who has been careful for a very long time and can finally stop. I drove to the care facility that evening and sat with Dorothy until 9 o'clock. She held my hand, and we watched a nature documentary about Alaska that neither of us was really watching. When I got up to leave, she held my hand a moment longer. "Is it done?" she asked. "It's done." She nodded. "Good," she said. "Now come home early more often." I sold the in-law suite. Technically, I renovated it back into attached square footage and relisted the house 6 months later. We bought a smaller place, single story. No suite, no extra rooms. A yard Dorothy could see from the sunroom. A neighborhood where the neighbors wave. Renee faces charges for financial exploitation of an at-risk adult and for the medication interference, which the DA's office is pursuing as a separate count. Marcus, who did not administer anything himself but knew and said nothing and benefited from the transferred funds, is facing his own charges. Their attorney has been very busy. Mine is cautiously optimistic. I get asked sometimes by friends, by the one cousin who calls every few months, by Dr. Paulson once, in a roundabout way, whether I blame myself for not seeing it sooner, for trusting too easily, for building the arrangement that made it possible. I have thought about it enough to have an answer now. I think trust is not the problem. I think the problem is what happens when we confuse trust with verification and tell ourselves that love makes the second one unnecessary. I trusted Marcus because he was my son, and I wanted to believe that the boy I had raised would not be capable of what he turned out to be capable of. That want is human. The mistake was letting it replace judgment entirely. I am not sure I would undo the trust. I am certain I would add the verification. Dorothy had a good winter. Her medication, properly managed again, stabilized her function in a way Dr. Paulson said he was genuinely encouraged by. She started a small watercolor class at the community center on Thursdays. She had painted when she was young and had given it up somewhere in the middle of raising children and keeping a household and being the kind of wife I did not deserve and was lucky enough to have anyway. Last Thursday I picked her up from the class and she showed me what she'd painted. A view of a lake, early morning, with pine trees on the far bank and the water completely still. "It's not finished," she told me. "It looks finished to me," I said. She looked at it for a moment. "No," she said. "There's supposed to be a boat. I just haven't put it in yet." I asked her where the boat was going. She smiled at me, the real one. The one that still, after 38 years, lands somewhere in my chest like it did the first time. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere nobody needs anything from us." I am 63 years old. I built something from nothing and watched it become something real. I made the mistake of assuming that the people closest to me were what I needed them to be rather than what they actually were. I came home early one Tuesday and found out the difference. I do not regret the Tuesday. I only regret it took a canceled flight to make me pay attention to what had always been there to see. If you are caring for someone who depends on you, or if someone you love is in the care of another, do not make the arrangement and walk away. Check. Verify. Come home early sometimes, without telling anyone you are coming. You may find everything exactly as it should be. But if you don't, you will be glad you looked. One thing I keep asking myself, and I want to ask you too. Could you have forgiven him? Marcus was my son. He sat at my table for 41 years. He was there when I buried my father. He called me on my birthday every year without fail. Until the year he didn't. I don't have a clean answer. I don't think one exists. What I have is Dorothy. In a sunroom, painting a lake with a boat that isn't there yet. That's enough. That is more than enough.